So I'm Martha Davis. I'm faculty director of the Center for Global Law and Justice at Northeastern University School of Law, and we'll hear from the other folks who are co-sponsoring this event in a minute. But I want to welcome everyone. Uh, Say hello from Boston. Our hope was to make this a little bit more of a live in-person event, but once Boston closed down because of the snowstorm yesterday, we didn't really have any choice except to make it more virtual than we anticipated. So we're excited to have this program again this year as we did last year. And of course there have been developments in the interim year, thinking about the relationship between the United States and Greenland, and the U.S. and Denmark as well, and then Minnesota and the rest of the United States, and so on. So there's a lot to talk about with this group. And with that, I'll turn it over to um, uh, Amanda Lyons, who's the. Oh wait, I'm sorry. I want to introduce the speakers, and then I'll turn it over to Amanda Lyons. So the two speakers that we have, the two experts that we have here today, very excited. We have Pernille Benjaminsen, who's the advisor to the Danish Human Rights Institute and is based in Nuuk, Greenland. So if folks have not spoken to somebody who's in Greenland before, this is our chance to do that. Thank you, Pernille, for making the time to join us. And then we're also joined by Morten Kjaerum, who is in Copenhagen and is the former director of the Danish Human Rights Institute some years ago, but more recently has been the director of the Fundamental Rights Agency at the European Union, and then also I think the president or the director of the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, and is now sort of a freelance human rights expert who brings a lot of experience to the table. So with that, then, now I'll turn it over to Amanda Lyons, who's the head of the Human Rights Center at University of Minnesota Law School, and our partner in putting this together and handle the logistics, among other things. So I'll turn it over to Amanda to make a few remarks.
Thanks, Martha. Hi, everybody. Are you able to hear me okay? Yeah, really appreciate everyone setting aside some time to come together today. As Martha said, this is the second time that we've tried this kind of cross country and cross continent and across the Atlantic conversation. And I think the shared reflection after the first conversation was that it is really powerful and meaningful to try to have these conversations across spaces. I've really enjoyed now for several years the chance to do that with Martha and Morten, and really grateful today to have Pernille with us to kind of expand this conversation and to bring in our students. So we're looking forward also to hearing the questions that you're all bringing to the table today. As Martha mentioned, and I'm sure you've all seen and are experiencing where you're at also, in Minnesota, we've had a really intense 3 months, at least. I mean, we can think about the different milestones in violence and I think extraordinary circumstances in Minnesota, but the latest of which is the federal operations here since December. And even in the midst, I would say, of our own kind of crises and responses, the news about Greenland remained a strong interest of people here, both in the university community, but I would say also more broadly, and thinking about how kind of challenges to the way we've seen things usually operate, questions about the rule of law internally and globally are really front of mind. And in January, when we saw images of some 1,500 troops stationed in Alaska, potentially for deployment to Minnesota, it wasn't clear if that was, when you first saw the image, if that was moving towards Greenland or Minnesota. So somehow the connection felt strong over these past months. And so just really glad that we were able to kind of get everyone online, and especially to Morten and Pernille for taking the time to speak with us. Maybe just the last thought is, also a question to folks here is, it seems that despite the intensity of the pressure in both context in Minnesota and in the context of Denmark and Greenland, it seems to be wildly unpopular. So here in Minnesota, at least, the sense is that the way the operations were done and what we refer to often as an invasion was done in such a way that it generated kind of public outcry and rejection really strongly. And at least the sense here and what we see in some polls is that the same is true for public opinion about the kind of the way this administration is speaking about Greenland. And so I think to some extent how the actions and the sense of public opinion has responded to that, I think would be an interesting question that we're thinking about here also. But I'll just turn it over to Martin to kind of kick us off with some opening kind of remarks and a presentation for us. And then we'll make sure that we have time for Q&A across the geographies before we wrap up at our expected time, 1:15 Minnesota, 2:15 Boston. Okay, over to you, Morten.
Thanks a lot, Amanda. Thanks, Martha, and thanks for the invitation to be here and join you. And it's fantastic to be back in this particular setting and getting the opportunity to having this exchange where we in a period where there are obvious tensions in this triangle between U.S., Greenland, and Denmark, or however you want to see the triangle. And what we had in mind was simply just to start out by, let's say, presenting a bit of the framework, spending, let's say, 20 minutes. We have some slides we would like to show you, and just sort of say so we are somewhat on par on knowledge. What are these relations about? I mean, there's the law, we have the people. I can tell you I've spoken with quite a few American journalists in the past months here, and I'm sure Pernille the same. And I've spent quite a bit of time sort of discussing or convincing them that you cannot just buy, this is not just a piece of land. There happen to be some human beings. And if anything you take away from this hour, I hope it is that this is all about human beings. And that's what Pernille and I will try to outline here. So Pernille, over to you to open. We will sort of go a little bit in between our slides, and then as Martha and Amanda have said, we will have plenty, hopefully plenty, or we will have plenty of time for discussion. So I will just share the screen, and I hope everybody can see it. You're fine, everybody?
Yes.
I see nodding. So I don't know, we thought it could be interesting just to start by where I stopped by saying this is about human beings. So Pernille, maybe you could say a few words about the people.
Yeah. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. I will start by talking a little about the country and the people of Kalaallit Nunaat. As you all know, Kalaallit Nunaat is a country, and with its own people, and we have our own flag, and we also celebrate the National Day, just like every other country does. We have our own national identity, we have our own language and culture. The majority of the population is Kalaallit, native Inuit, and it's actually quite a bit, approximately 88% of the population is native Kalaallit. We celebrate our National Day on June 21st, which is the longest day of the year. On this day, we celebrate our culture, identity, and of course our self-governance, as we introduced in 2009. And one of the things I always want to say when we talk about Kalaallit Nunaat, Inuit, and the history of us is that we have been on this land for thousands of years, and we have a deep connection to the land. So it's not, the history doesn't start with Danes arriving in Kalaallit Nunaat or other people, Vikings or whatever, who has been here. So that is very important for me to always say that we go a long way back on this country. We are descendants of Arctic migrations from Canada, and we share a lot of Inuit culture, language, and traditional knowledge with a lot of the Inuit across the Arctic. Next, yeah.
No, thanks a lot for that, Pernille, and really underscoring that it's not the Danes who sort of intervented Greenland. People were there, but we often have this, in particular from the Western Hemisphere. We have this feeling that whenever we arrived, we sort of discovered these places and then we made them, and this is where history starts, and it's really important to recall that component element. And it is historically a fairly novel recognition. And that's why we have put up here the UN Charter from 1945, because this is actually where we really get into international law, this recognition of people, that and the purpose of the United Nations is to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. So we suddenly get the peoples on board in here. I just want to tell you one interesting story, also from Denmark. And this is sort of another part of Denmark. That was we have always been fighting with the Germans. That's our southern neighbor. And here in up to the after this First World War, we in this southern part of Denmark, the northern part of Germany, where all these fights had gone on for centuries, we decided to make a referendum. Basically, ask people, where do you want to belong? And the area was cut into 4 pieces, and there was a referendum in each of the 4. Luckily, 2 of them went to Germany and 2 of them to Denmark. Great, fine. The border was drawn. This is, so to say, where the borders will be. Then after Second World War, where Germany lost, the Allied forces came to the Danish government and said, listen, now you have the chance to take back the land that you lost, the northern German land. And there the Danish government, I must say, was smart at that time. This is right around 1945 when the UN was established. And the Danish government said, no, thank you. We had a referendum. We respect what people said at that time. And they said they wanted to belong to Germany. We have no indication that this has changed. So we will keep it as it is. It's sort of, again, respecting the self-determination of peoples. And that was then again underscored in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, the 2 1966 covenants, that all people have the right of self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. So that has sort of been the essence. Then just another piece of international law, which is important in this context as well, is of course the General Assembly Resolution 1514 from 1960 that declares the colonialism is incompatible with the UN Charter. And that resolution also had an enormous impact on the relation between Denmark and Greenland, and Pernille will come into that in a second. Let me just take one other historical link when talking about Denmark. We also owned the U.S. Virgin Islands, and at that time it was not U.S. Virgin Island; it was Danish Virgin Islands. And in 1920, they were actually sold to the U.S. I think for $20 million US or something like that. That's not important. Anyhow, they were sold. I worked there quite a bit with some of the groups on the islands some years ago, and they kept on coming back to that issue of Denmark just selling the land without any referendum, without any discussion. It was sort of just basically handed over to the US. And I must say, it really at that time it made an enormous impression on me. How this now for the second, third, maybe fourth generation still is a bitterness, a sourness in that population on the U.S. Virgin Islands, that they were just sold as, yeah, as you sell whatever, you don't sell people. So with that, over to you, Pernille.
Thank you. Yes, and as I said before, the history of Inuit goes way before 1721 when the Danes arrived. But today we are talking about the relationship between Denmark and Galatlidunaat, or at least the historical context. And for about 300 years, Greenland was a colony. No, maybe not 300 years, but from 1721 to 1953, Greenland was Galatlidunaat was a colony owned by Denmark. And as Morten was talking about before, when UN decided that colonialism wasn't aligned with the New World Order, Galatlidunaat was incorporated into the Kingdom of Denmark as a way of changing the status of the country and no longer being a colony of Denmark. There's a lot of history in that, and I will not come into that, but I think it's very interesting to dig deeper into that context for people who are interested in Galatlidunaat or the Danish history. But for us, it means not just that we were incorporated into to Denmark, but there is a lot of history connected to the way it was done and how the people of Galatlidunaat wasn't legally a part of deciding the way it was done. So that is very interesting to look into if you are interested in learning more about the history. Galatlit has always been eager to run their own business, or we want to run our own country. So in 1979, after negotiations between the Danish government, we were granted home rule, and with that, then we got our own parliament and control over a lot of domestic affairs. Later on, as we have been developing, we moved to self-governance, and with that we expanded our autonomy from Denmark and taking over more domestic affairs, and also taking over control over natural resources, as it is very important for our country to be in charge of our what do you say, underground, hvad siger man?
Or natural resources.
Yeah, in control over the natural resources. So that was a big move when that was accepted. So the current status of Galatlidunaat is that we are a self-governing part of the Kingdom of Denmark. We are not a part of the oh my God, it's so difficult to say. Let me just say EU. It's easier. In 1985, the people of Galatlidunaat withdrew from EU. We didn't want to be a part of the union because it had a lot of impact on our fishery industry and so on. So we needed to become independent of that and just be in more control of the fishery industry, as it is the biggest export industry we have in Galashiq Nunat. Our constitutional framework is the Self-Government Act from 2009, and also the Danish Constitution. And the Danish Constitution, because we are a part of the Kingdom of Denmark, then the Danish institution applies to all countries within the Kingdom of Denmark. So that is Galashiq Nunat, Denmark, and the Faroe Islands. We have our own parliament called Inatsisartut and our own government called Naalakkersuisut, and together they are called the self-government. And we have taken over, Galashiq Nunat has taken over jurisdiction for a wide range of internal affairs. As I said before, natural resources, environment, healthcare, public finances, fisheries, education, and so on. But there are some areas, of course, we are still, a lot of areas, Denmark has still
Responsibilities.
Yeah, Denmark is still, under
responsible.
Yeah, responsible for. But there are some areas that is not possible for us to take over, and that is due to the Danish Constitution in the way it has been constructed. So these areas are foreign affairs, defense, and monetary policy. So even though we wanted to take over these areas, we wouldn't be able to. At least there is a big discussion about that. We wouldn't be able to as long as the Danish Constitution is as it is. So that must be some discussion for the future if we move towards that. Yeah, and I want to talk about some of the key aspects of the Self-Government Act. One of the main or the most important thing that was
introduced
was that the people of Galashiq Nunat is recognized as a people under international law and with the right to self-determination, and that is important for the country to, if we want to become independent, or if we want to build our own nation in the future. So that is a very key aspect of the Government Act. The government, Naalakkersuisut, and the Danish government are equal parties. So it's not like that the Danish government is superior or that we are under the Danish government. So they are equal parties, and the way things have been constructed, they are supposed to work together and for the benefit of the Kingdom of Denmark, for Greenland, and for Denmark, so on. So Galashiq Greenlandic, as maybe you would say, is the official language of Galashiq Nunat, and that was also introduced with the Self-Government Act. The self-government have the legislative and executive power within the areas of responsibilities, and that is all the domestic laws that we have our own parliament that accepts create laws and accept laws and so on. And within the Danish Constitution, Galashiq Nunat has the possibility to negotiate international agreements in areas which concerns Galashiq Nunat, but only Galashiq Nunat. We are not able to negotiate international agreements that has concerns within for Denmark or for the Faroe Islands, only for the ones that has only concerns for Galashiq Nunat. So that is something we are able to do in some aspects, but with the construction of the Kingdom of Denmark, Denmark has the power to negotiate international agreements across the Kingdom of Denmark, or for the Kingdom of Denmark.
Okay, that would actually, in practical terms, mean that you would be able to negotiate yourself without Copenhagen a hospital ship from the U.S.
Yeah,
Because that would be within the health
yeah,
area. So yeah, so
exactly.
and would not be foreign policy in a bigger sense.
No,
Slightly foreign policy, but
yeah,
uh,
yeah, that's true.
no, it's just sort of an idea that would.
Yeah, good example.
Uh,
Mm.
Excellent. Let's then just wind up with the last slide, which is then sort of the agreements and the structure in the U.S.-American Greenland relation, or Greenland-U.S., however you want to make the sequence of countries. The first, I mean, it goes way back, but sort of in modern times, the 1941 Greenland Defense Agreement is extremely interesting. I mean, this is 1941. It's during the Second World War, and where actually our Danish ambassador, Denmark was occupied at that time. The Danish ambassador in Washington, he basically, on his own will and own idea, made this agreement, which opened Greenland for the American forces. And that was, of course, to protect or not run the risk that the Germans, the Nazi regime, would install themselves there. Denmark was occupied by the Nazi regime. So that could have taken place. So on his own accord, and I mean, it's a sort of say constitutionally speaking, it's really an interesting part of Danish history, but let's not dwell on that.
Can I
That was then, sorry.
can I add something interesting to that part also?
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
at that time there was an active mining in Greenland, the cryolite. I don't know if you have heard about it, and that was very crucial to during the war, because the cryolite was the material to make aluminum. So in order not to risk that the mine stopped producing the cryolite, there was also an interest for America to continue the work in the mines, so that they could keep extracting the minerals when Denmark wasn't able to. So that is also a very interesting aspect of this agreement that maybe haven't been talked about that much. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, good point. I was not aware of it, but I think it just underscores again the overall interaction or relationship between Greenland, Denmark, and the U.S. That on defense and mining, there have always been a complete open door for the U.S. And it very much sort of, they took the outset in the 1941 agreement and the whole thinking in those friendly relations. So for the U.S., it was always just a question of knocking on the door, asking to get access either to the resources or to let's say building defense capabilities in Greenland. In particular, on the defense, the U.S. has over time been very active and at bases across Greenland. Right now, I think there's only one left, but there have been very many. And on mining, there have been much less interest for various reasons. I'm not quite sure exactly why, but it is probably because it's difficult to mine in Greenland. It's costly. So there are many reasons, but I mean, I think you have currently, I stand to be corrected, 0 mining concessions. U.S., you have something like 24 Canadian. So the Canadians have been much more active in that, and the U.S. could have entered and as if they would have wished to do it, but obviously they were not interested. The 41 agreement was then substituted with the 1951 defense agreement, and then the 53, 59, etc., and then all the way. So you have had this continuity of agreements building very much on the 41 basis and the 41 thinking. So I think with this, we will close the slides. We can always come back if there's something you want to return to. But I think this is basically what Pernille and I would like to present, and then we'll see if there's some questions, comments, or Martha, Amanda, anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Morten and Pernille. And of course, for a lot of us, this is new information, but important to know given the developments recently. So we really appreciate you laying out the background there. What we thought we'd do then, and this is what worked last time, so we'll see if it works this time, is really go back and forth. We were going to do from Boston to Minnesota, but since I think instead we'll do online versus people that are in the room in Minnesota, and open it up for questions. So let me ask if the people that are online here, if you have a question, you could raise your hand, and then we'll give you the floor. Yes, Alia.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for the very interesting talk. I was curious if kind of what possible negotiations between the government in Greenland and the US regarding um access to mining, because that seems to be a very big thing that is talked about, at least as being a desire to access minerals. And what how Greenlandic sovereignty can be used to kind of avoid creating recreating colonial kind of relations to the land, and maybe a little bit about what Greenlandic notions of land sovereignty mean to them. But yeah, thank you.
Pernille?
I don't think there is any negotiation concerning mining at this point, or at least we don't know anything about it if there is any negotiation. Do you have any? Do you know anything more than I? I don't think we're not there yet. I think that right now we are just the negotiation is about trying to figure out how to solve this triangle tense right now. So I don't think mining is a part of it, or at least not in we not hear about it in public. So in terms of the question of sovereignty, as Morten started out by saying the UN Charter, UN Charter, Morten? Yes, is the international framework that the country and the people of Greenland is vi læner os op af. Hvordan siger man det?
Which is the basis for
Yeah.
for
Yeah, it's the basis for our sovereignty, and if any other country wanted to colonize Galatlit-Nunaat, then you go against international law. So that is really the basis for Galatlit-Nunaat also, and that is why I said that the Self-Governance Act. It is very important with the first phrase saying that the people of Galatlit-Nunaat are recognized as people under international law, and it is directly connected to the international law that grants us the right to self-determination. So that is very important. As the last question was about how we view sovereignty or country, I think that maybe something like we don't feel like we own the country, we belong to it. We don't have hvordan siger man ejendomsret?
You cannot own land,
Yeah, I'm sorry,
your own land.
my English is sometimes a
Mm,
little, I don't use it enough. We
Good.
don't own land. We own the house, but we don't own the land the house is standing on. So we have a different concept of how we view owning country and land. But of course, we abide by the same framework and international law as the rest of the world. But as a people, we have in our culture and in our traditions, we have different ways of viewing how to connect to land and so on. And of course, our domestic laws doesn't give us the right to own our land. So also in the domestic law, it's different than you would see in Denmark, where you have the right to own the land that your house is on. So it's a little different, but still overall we have the same construction as other countries have.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Coming back to the issue of mining, I would not be. I totally agree with what you said. We don't know, so this is pure guessing. But I would not be surprised if it entered into some sort of new agreement that there would be some limits to what you can sort of say sell to other countries. There was a situation where the Chinese were very close to get some very favorable or some good contracts in Greenland via some Australian companies. That was in the end blocked by the new government after the election in Greenland. So it followed the democratic process in Greenland. But let's say that you hadn't had that election, so the old political structure had actually accepted this selling the or giving these concessions to the Chinese indirectly. I think this is probably something the Americans would like to get into to the new agreement in one way or another. However, you can do it. But it's interesting. I mean, and I think it's quite that the interest in mining has been very limited from the American side.
But also, if I can just add one thing, but it's also very important for us as a people to make sure that mining doesn't disturb our nature and disturb because our food resources, of course, not only we get a lot of our groceries comes from Denmark, but we are still hunting, we are still fishing, we are still relying on nature. So it's very important for us as a people, and we are very concerned about that part, that mining shouldn't disturb nature. It shouldn't destroy our ability to go hunt and get our food from nature, that is a big part of our culture and identity. So that of course is a big issue for us.
Thank you. So maybe I don't want to take one of the questions away, but maybe we can circle back at some point to talk a little bit about private interests and the role that they might play, for example, in mining or in fishing and so on, because I'm sure there's a lot of commercial activity that isn't so directly involved in foreign affairs, but it's pretty powerful. So let's turn to the folks in Minneapolis.
Hopefully you can hear me all right. I'll kind of preface this by saying I have had like a long-standing, just like not personal, but just academic interest in the Arctic and a lot of, Greenland and the Faroe Islands and the framework of the Kingdom of Denmark. I have kind of two questions, so I'll kind of pose them separately just so they don't get intermingled. But the first one's a bit more just broadly about the political structure of the Kingdom of Denmark. You had talked a bit about referendums, and I think specifically, the things of self-rule and also in South Jutland. I'm thinking also about the 1948 referendum that occurred on the Faroe Islands, I know, where the Faroese people had voted by a slim majority, but a majority for independence from the Kingdom of Denmark, but that was never followed through with by the kingdom. I'm just curious about what at least the commentary is about that within the Kingdom of Denmark, or at least about how the Faroe Islands works in this structure along Greenland is also kind of implicated in this in some way. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Did you want to add in your second question?
I can add in the second question too. This is a bit more pointed on, I guess, Greenland, and that's just more. I know in 2023 there was a constitutional committee that was created by the Greenlandic government to draft a constitution in this kind of gradual march towards independence. And I was just wondering if there were any updates on that, or how this might be kind of broad, but just if there is kind of how these considerations about what the Greenlandic constitution will look like moving forward, especially with this kind of external pressure and US pressure, especially on trying to impact their domestic affairs. So you can take those in whichever order you want, sorry.
Pernille, want to start?
Kan du sige noget om det med Færøerne?
Jeg skal nok, ja.
I can talk about the constitution, the draft to the constitution that was made here. It's really kind of it really follows the spirit or the lines or whatever you call it of international law, trying to not to exclude anyone in the society, or just to be and I don't know how to explain it in English. How hvad siger man, at det er en sådan en altså sådan rummelig, den rummer, at vi er en mangfoldig befolkning.
It's
okay, I can say it in a different way. Galatlit, we are a lot of different people are here. Not only Galatlit are here, we also people from Asia, and we have people from Iceland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and so on. So the constitution is really trying to embrace that we are the population is mixed with all kinds of nationalities. So it's not a constitution that you maybe would expect to look like really Inuit or Galatlit culture or tradition. It's a wider than that, and trying to embrace just the way that the worlds are looking today. But as the moment, it's not. There's no moving forward in with the hvad siger man?
Of noget.
Det der med selvstændighed.
Independence.
Yeah, independence. Yeah, we are not moving forward on that. Recently, we have activated, not activated. We have der er blevet igangsat den her kommissionsundersøgelse.
A commission has been established.
Yeah, a commission has been established to look into what is needed to move forward independence. So right now we are just in the phase of
exploring.
Yeah, exploring and finding out how it can be done. But this is not something new. The discussion on independence in Galatlit has been going on since forever. So it's just something that we are moving slowly, and it is something that we are discussing in society and in debates, and just not something that when you hear about it in media from out as international media tend to make a big issue about it, but it's really not. It's just something that we are just commonly talking about and exploring and trying to figure out how it can be done and what will be best for the country and so on. So it's just in a progress, and it's not something that we are expecting is going to happen within the last few years. So yes.
And if I can just add to that one, and then I'll say 2 words about Faroe Islands, but on the seen from the kingdom, from the Danish side, I would say I think most Danes are sort of like to be having Greenland as part of the kingdom, and good relations, friendly relations. But should the Inuit population, the Greenlander, decide to become independent, I think following a regular process, a referendum and whatever, I think most Danes would be fairly relaxed and said, fine, great, wish you luck, and let's collaborate now in in a new format. There's some people who sort of, I remember a diplomat who once said, but if they want to go independent, then you would bomb them, wouldn't you? So no, I don't think so. We wouldn't. But I mean, really, and I'm genuine when I say most Danes, that is the feeling. On the Faroe Islands, I would say the feeling is the same. If they want to go independent, fine. The structure is very much the same. I mean, the sort of with the home rule system, they have also a parliament, have taken over a number of issues, and as but they have a wider, or there we have had quite a discussion in relation to Russia on the fishery, because that's the sort of the fishery where they can decide, but is it part of foreign policy when they let Russian fisher boats actually land their fish on the islands, or then. So there you have had quite a attention, also a lot of critique against Faroe Islands from the EU. So, but there's one interesting point, just that Pernille said that Greenland is not part of the EU, but actually Greenland people are EU citizens because they have a Danish passport, and with the Danish passport you are EU citizen. So they're not member, but things are complicated.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, but I would just like to add also something about your question, that with the pressure from everything right now, of course that has affected the way that we view the future and so on. But I think it's because of the tension right now, because before all of the attention from the world and also the media, world press and so on, we were really not discussing independence. It's something that comes and goes, and then we have election, then it comes again. So it wasn't something we were actively discussing when everything happened. But of course, now that we are in the center of attention and so on, it's not something we want to discuss either, because we just really want to stabilize the situation we are in right now. Also because we are not close to taking the steps to independence. So we just really want to do it in our own pace and have the peace to figure out how to do it in a way that is good for Kalaallit Nunaat.
Great, thank you. So we're getting low on people online, but let me turn it to folks online to see if there's a question here. Buddy, so why don't we give it back over to Minneapolis then?
Just wanted to say, first of all, thank you, and for Pernille for taking time to discuss with us. And like I had a question kind of focused on like what a call to action might look like, specifically with like a rights respecting like strategy for like the U.S. in Greenland territory. But like yeah, I guess that is the question, like what would a rights respecting U.S. strategy in Greenland actually look like? And like more personally, how do we, and like how might we, or like who should be held accountable for security goals when it comes to things like self-determination?
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear what the question was.
Oh yeah.
So maybe a little louder or closer to the microphone.
Sure thing. What would a rights-respecting U.S. strategy in Greenland actually look like in practice? And then with that, how do we and who should be held accountable when security goals conflict with like self-determination goals?
Morten, can you start out? Then maybe I can.
Yeah, I simply, the sound is really bad. Martha, can you hear it?
I'm just a little bit closer. I think the question, and correct me if I'm wrong, Caleb, is kind of for those of us that are here in the United States, if you have any thoughts of kind of how could we think about a U.S. strategy or approach on Greenland that would be respecting the human rights of people in Greenland and the right of people in Greenland to self-determination? And then I think a second question also, how do we kind of balance the consideration of right to self-determination? And at least what we hear in US media and talk about kind of security goals and needs to be present, like kind of the justification for US invasion or kind of insertion in Greenland. How do we kind of think about security concerns that we see presented and the rights and legal perspectives that you've presented today, if that's fair?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Oh, good question.
Yeah. So I don't know how much you have heard in the media on your side, but one of the things that is repeated in the coverage here and in Denmark and in Galatlit is that we already have every opportunity to work on security. There is no limitations in that for the US. Both the government of Galatlit and the government of Denmark is willing to discuss and expand and just figure out a way that security can be managed in a way that satisfies all parties. So in that sense, there are no limitations. Basically, it's all up to how to just agree on something that works for the US and for us. And both our government and the Danish government has been very clear about their willingness to renegotiate security issues and so on. So I really feel like that there is a way to just to talk about these things, negotiate about them, and move forward in a peaceful way, as we have done for many years. Morten?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's a very good question, and that's a question that we have asked ourselves. I think both in Nuuk and in Copenhagen is, but what is it? I mean, what is this about? Because exactly as Pernille says, and we sort of also showed on the last slide, that I mean, there's full access to military, so any security issues can be raised, as well as access to natural resources. And these are the two issues that have been mentioned from the American side, and which are sort of the most obvious. So the thing is, sort of like coming back to your question on what would I mean, that's a respect. I mean, if you should respect fundamental rights, you should respect them, respect the people, and that is what it's about. Follow the procedures, but the one thing you should know, and is that Denmark and I mean, as NATO allies, have been totally leaning up against the US for always been sort of, I mean, much more than France and many other countries. It has been extremely obedient. And sometimes some of us have said, well, this is maybe too much. But that has been a long, consistent, whatever you have socialist government or conservative government, it has been a consistent line, political line. We were the first to come into the allies when after 9/11, we lost more people proportionally in Afghanistan. So again, when Trump came out and said that we didn't do anything and we were sort of behind the scene, etc., we were in the front line in Helmand, whatever, and lost proportionally more soldiers than the US did. So it really hurts. I've never seen so big demonstrations in Copenhagen from people who have been in the defense and been in the military as we have had in the recent months, because really people feel deeply insulted, both on the larger scale that we have always been a very trusted ally, and then also on the, so to say, on the level of the combatants. So it's a very good question, really good question, and this is why we sort of say on the Danish Greenland side favor so much that we are now have entered into a diplomatic track, and then maybe some of the most recent agreement should be updated, should be you can always make some adjustments, and that's of course what we hope will come out with.
Yeah, in regard to the first question, I'm not sure I understood it right, but I can say something that I feel like it's very important from our perspective is that learning history, learning what has been going on, learning the history of the Inuit people and what we have been through. When you are aware of history and when you are aware of what colonialism and hvad hedder sådan noget? Undertrykkelse.
Suppression.
Yeah, suppression. When you're aware of those things, then maybe you have a different view on the people that you are talking about, or the people that is right now the people of Galatlinet is very much in center in all of the debates. But somehow our history is not present in those debates, and I really feel like it's important to educate yourself on what the history looks like. To understand why the tension between Denmark, US, and Galatlinet is as it is right now, because it all comes down to history. So I always say when I talk about these things, knowing history, knowing the history of Galatlinet, knowing the history of Denmark and the relationship and all that is so important to understand why we are in the situation that we are right now. And I think also when you know things like that, and you know the legal framework and you know international law, then you will have also a different view on the people and a different kind of respect for the people, as not being just you are distinct from them, but knowing their history is also important to sympathize with the people. So that is very important for me to say.
Yeah, just a question as we wrap up. For sure. I guess like with that too, in regards to like conflicts like these, when we think about accountability, how do we like structure the way we talk about who is held accountable and like the manner in which we hold them accountable, regarding, us, like self-determination and things of that nature?
Were you able to hear that?
Amanda?
I'm just not.
Can someone? I'm not adding too much spin on the question here, but I think a question that we hear often from students, and Caleb, correct me if I'm wrong, is just kind of looking at the international law and the premise, who's accountable? How do we kind of enforce, or where do we turn to seek accountability for some of the rights that are guaranteed, or the kind of the advancement that's made to kind of reject colonialism? Where do we look for in terms of accountability?
Yeah, that is actually a good question, because international law is of course international law, but how do you enforce them? And I really think that a lot of the reasons international law is working, or in the way it's working, is because the countries respect them. And I think that we haven't really been in the situation before when one country doesn't respect international law in the way we are experiencing right now. So yes, of course we have in another manner, maybe but I think this is maybe a new situation, and I don't really know where to go to find this. How do we go about with the accountability? Do you know, Morten?
Yeah, but of course, I mean, for the moment, it's a discussion. It's a threat. It's sort of, we're not violating anything except from people's good sleep in the night, and you stress populations, and that's bad enough. But if the US, let's say, should move on and do a armed intervention in Greenland, and then it's the International Court in Den Hague. But again, we know that the US normally do not recognize the rulings of the International Court of Justice. So it is. We are talking about sort of say the breakup of the rule-based global order, I tend to say, oh yes, it's breaking up in the way that we know it now, but we should all, including yourself, do our utmost to see, okay, what should the next level be? It's not that the old rule-based global order was perfect, because for among other reasons that some of the big powers like the US very often have neglected rulings from international bodies, or not part of international bodies such as the International Criminal Court. But so maybe we can do it better moving forward, learning also from lessons like the one we are in the middle of just now. And I think that is up to the current professors in law schools, Martha, Amanda, and you as law students and actors, lawyers or not. I think some of you are not, but definitely can contribute to what should it look like moving forward. And there's a really interesting discussion. Let's grab the opportunity now when everything is shaking, not to just sit and cry, but really try to come up with new models.
Yeah,
and
great.
And that's exactly to your question.
Yeah, well, I would also say, I'm not a panelist, but we should also hold a mirror up to ourselves. You know, that accountability is not only the external, the international court and so on. It's also, you know, in the US, we have some accountability and opportunities to hold people accountable. So with that, Amanda, can I turn over to you for a farewell from Minneapolis?
Yeah, just I mean, really the last comments and remarks I think are a great ending point. I think kind of the time that we spent today is part of trying to educate ourselves and cross some of these divides and make these connections and figure out from the different places where we all are, how do we kind of advance accountability? And as we think about or whatever profession we're moving into, how do we kind of lean into continuing to learn more about this? And so I want to say to be continued. I hope that we have round 3 and many more conversations in different ways across these spaces, and just a deep appreciation to our friends in Boston, and especially to Morten and Pernille for taking the time to share such important kind of insights with us. So thank you all. And yeah, I will see you at the next one.